Yes, we are.
Okay, we're going to begin then in 3, 2, 1. Hi, and welcome to Global StratView's third virtual panel. This one we're discussing the conflict and the role of Turkey in the South Caucasus conflict. I am your host, J Karem. I'm the senior White House correspondent for Playboy magazine and a contributor to CNN and MSNBC and a few other networks that'll have me on when I give them my opinion. Today, we're going to discuss Turkey under Erdogan and how it's flexing its muscles to emerge as the paramount Islamic power and revive the Ottoman Empire. Meanwhile, neighbors like Greece, Syria, and Armenia are bearing the immediate brunt. The effects of these policies are being felt as far away as Europe, South Asia, and North Africa, not to mention the United States. And while other places are witnessing new waves of terror and attacks, the real question is, can anything be done to curb these extremist ambitions? If you have questions, please put them in the chat portion of your Zoom, and we'll forward them to our panelists. Joining me are some very distinguished panelists who will discuss this. We're going to introduce all of them. All of them have a chance to talk to you. We'll start with the Honourable Stephen Mann is with us. Stephen has long been active in international affairs. Most recently was a senior advisor for ExxonMobil. He came to the position after a career in the United States diplomatic service, where he specialized in the former Soviet Union. Also with us is Gerard Libaridian. I hope I got that one right, Gerard. He's a former senior advisor to the first president of Armenia, and as such, he had primary responsibility for negotiations in Turkey for about 6 years. Also with us is Ergun Babahan. He is the editor he studied at Istanbul's University Law Faculty. He completed his internship as a lawyer, and he's worked as a reporter for the largest regional daily of the day. He, after his return to Turkey, worked at Sabah as an editor and the editor-in-chief for many years. We're glad to have him with us. And of course, he's married and has 2 children and lives in Montreal. So if they run into the screen, we'll understand why. So I'm trying to keep my grandson out of it as we go on. Zoe Colares, God, I hope I pronounced your name right too. She's award-winning wordsmith, freelance journalist, multilingual media manager, and conversion copywriter with nearly 25 years of experience gained in Canada and in global markets. She is Greek-Canadian, has had the fortune to live in both countries. And I won't get her recipes, I'm sure, but I'll give her one for, you call it baklava, we call it baklava, but that's...
We say baklava.
Yeah, and finally, the Honourable Leo Housakos, the senator from Canada. He was appointed to the Canadian Senate by Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2008. He was a Speaker of the Senate in 2015. He's active with numerous parliamentary friendship groups and has moved several motions in the Senate of Canada calling on the government of Canada to take various courses of action against regimes for their malignant actions. And all of them have an extensive understanding of what we're going to talk about. And so to begin, I'm going to start with Senator Leo Housakos. If you'll tell us, just give us a couple of minutes of why this is an important issue and what can be done about it.
Thank you, Brian, for inviting me on this panel of
and thank you all for being here. If I didn't thank you at the top, thank you all.
Indeed. Look, it's a very important topic we're dealing with today. We're dealing with, of course, the growing role in the Middle East and in the South Caucasus and in the Balkans of a state that has gone rogue. That's the truth of the matter. I think the alarm that I've been trying to set off in the Senate of Canada, and I hope we can set it off throughout the Western democratic world, is that our foreign policy as Western democracies has deviated from one based on principle to one based on just complete short-term economic commercial interests. And I think we're going to be paying the price in the long term for it. Right now, we have 3 evils in the world, and that is China, Iran, and Turkey. Turkey has decided to compete with Iran as the preeminent supporter of Islamic fundamentalism in the world. They are by without a doubt, the biggest supporter of the cause. And we've seen the foreign policy of Turkey throughout the years be very malleable. Once upon a time, they toyed with the fact of wanting to join the EU. Of course, they're members of NATO, but they're not behaving in a fashion that is becoming of a member of NATO. We've seen that in Syria. We've seen that in the last few months in the Aegean. And of course, we've seen it, of course, in Artsakh over the last few weeks. They have been the instigating force for what I think is one of the greatest crimes that has happened in many, many years. I also want to highlight as well in the course of this panel, how I feel my government is just as guilty of other Western democracies in not taking their head out of the sand and accepting certain realities that we face in the world today.
Thank you, Leo. Senator, we're going to move to Gerard. Gerard, if you can give us your breakdown of the situation.
Well, let me thank you, Brian. Let me begin with a couple of general observations, and maybe later we can go into further detail. One is that when Erdogan came to power, as the senator mentioned, he had inclinations to push for membership in the EU, which required the adoption of certain laws and certain values. But then he started moving away. And there has been a question in my mind and in the minds of many as to how and why did that change occur. I don't think there has been any definitive answer to that question. That is, was he like that before and hiding, or did he evolve? Was he rejected, or he felt rejected and he evolved? What I see happening is now a number of strains coming together in his policy. Whether actually believing in them or not, I don't know, but certainly his personality matters. The strains are a desire to recreate the Ottoman Empire in a neo-imperial manner, which is a matter of power and extension of power. The other is the strain of pan-Turkism that is appealing to ethnicity throughout and justifying that. The third is pan-Islamic, the strain, and all of these are there in addition to the logical conclusion of the securitized state. That is, everything that happens is a matter of security, every little danger is a matter of national security, and therefore you have to do everything and anything you can do, including violation of international law, including getting into your neighbor's territory, extending your control over other parts of in your region. So the answer to the question is what can be done, I think is that the rest of the countries, particularly Europe and the US and Canada, that matter for Turkey should have a very conscious and united front and take measures and take stands that go, as the senator said, beyond immediate commercial and other interests. So I think that is the way to do it. If not, then eventually he may collapse. But the point is that when such adventurers get into the mood of doing damage, they do the damage even if the adventure is for a brief period.
Understood.
To small countries, yeah.
I'm going to move on now to Ambassador Stephen Mann, a retired American diplomat. I wanted to put this in here. Among other assignments, the Caspian Energy Envoy, a mediator on Caucasus conflicts, and opened the first United States embassy in Armenia. So, Stephen, I'm particularly interested in what you think will happen and can happen. So please tell me your view in the next couple of minutes if we can make it succinct.
Sure, thanks very much. And I can't tell you what will happen, but I'll say that like the rest of us, I'm watching it attentively. And Brian, I look at these things generally from an Eastern perspective in my career. And when you look at this month's fighting in the Caucasus, it's a historic and somewhat stunning month because of the Azerbaijani victory, which was assisted greatly by Turkish military participation. So on Karabakh, we have a ceasefire, and that's imposed a settlement in great part on the conflict. Looking forward now, there are two still overarching questions to be answered on that. One is, what will the future status of Karabakh and its inhabitants be? And that's one that occupied all of us Minsk Group co-chairs greatly over the years. The other is, how will the return of refugees and IDPs play out? So those are key Karabakh related issues. I'll sum up by saying that Turkey's participation in these events has raised Turkish profile and influence to a degree that we have not seen since the late 1990s, when Turkey was a foundational part of the East-West energy corridor. So for 2020 now, Turkey is once again a notable player in the Caucasus.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Zoe, you're up.
Well, for myself, it's more about being Greek Canadian. I've always had a strong Greek identity, thanks to my parents, and I think a lot of people can attest to the same. But when I lived in Greece for almost 15 years, it really brought to light Turkey's attempts to control a lot of things in the region, and its relationship with Greece, and how oftentimes Greece, I find, is the scapegoat for the European Union. You know, if they don't want Turkey in there, they're going to put Greece in front to say, well, Turkey, you're not doing this, you're not complying with this, you're breaking the rules on this. And it's a really sensitive topic. It concerns me because what's going to happen to Greeks. Concerns me because I have friends, Armenian friends, who have transgenerational trauma because of what happened with the genocide that's never been recognized by Turkey, and for that matter, Israel as well. I'll throw that in there. So it's Turkey's efforts to control things, its relationship with Greece, its relationship with other countries in the region are things that concern me. So I have a real keen interest on keeping on top of what's going on with them.
Thank you, Ergun. We're going to end this opening remarks with you.
To really understand Turkish policies, you should go back to Talat Pasha. According to some people, the real founder of modern Turkey and architect of Armenian genocide. When Turkey lost the lands in Balkans to Yugoslavia, Greece, etc., Ottomans, they decided to come back to Anatolia and not to have the same fate again. They chose to do ethnic cleansing. They wiped out the Armenians in 1915 and tried to create a Sunni Turkish Islamic country, at the beginning secular. Now we are seeing its Turkish Islamic model. It's the same party in power today. Whoever came to power in Turkey, name it center-right or center-left, and in between military coups, this party, the founder of modern Turkey, influenced all policy-making decisions. So in its parts, Mosul and Kirkuk are part of Turkey. Northern Syria is a part of modern Turkey also. So with Erdogan and with this economic crisis it's going through, some of his policies are energy-driven. Look at Libya, Azerbaijan, and Eastern Mediterranean. He wants to create new sources for its aggressive policies. And it's very pragmatic man. With Biden, we see he stopped his jihadist policies Before Biden, he sent his head of religious affairs to Hagia Sophia with a sword in his hand. Now he says he feels Turkey in European Union, a part of European culture. So it's changeable, but always be aggressive against three nations in the region: Armenians, Kurds, and Greece.
Thank you. But we have two questions already from our audience. But before we do that, I want to take a second here and follow up on a couple of the opening statements. And Senator, I'll start with you. You had spoken about the evils in the region, and that Turkey is a member of NATO. So, in your opinion, anybody else can chime in after the senator answers as well. But to the point, should Turkey be kicked out of NATO, Senator?
Without a doubt. At the end of the day, when it comes to democracy, human rights, and international rule of law, we should never bend. It should never be negotiable. And as I've said, over the last few decades, our Western democracies have become more and more tolerant of this egregious behavior on the part of various rogue nations around the world. And currently, we've seen it with Mr. Erdogan. He's an occupying force in northern Cyprus, has been for decades, ignoring UN resolutions, ignoring the call to respect international rule of law, and doing it in the most belligerent fashion. So at some particular point, if you allow these individuals to continue to encroach on the basic principles that we're supposed to espouse and defend, they think it's acceptable. They think it's part of the international norm because that's what they know, that's what they understand. And if we don't learn from history that if we allow bullies and tyrants and we appease them, and that always leads to disaster. So I think there has to be ramifications for this type of behavior. We let them get away with it in Syria. My own government did. What they did in Syria was so unacceptable that our own Trudeau government decided to put in place a ban on Canadian military equipment sold to Turkey. A few months ago, after just one phone call with President Erdogan, my understanding is they got an exemption. An LR3 radar technology was sold, which found its way on drones, which found its way in the war in Artsakh, killing innocent Armenian people. Now, our government raises their hand in the air and says, we're going to have an investigation to find out how it happened. Well, it happened because somebody granted an exemption or our government was incompetent. Either way, there's blood on the hands of the Canadian government.
Ambassador Mann, do you think they should be kicked out of, and what's the downside if you do kick them out of NATO?
No, totally opposed to that proposition. Turkey is a member of our alliance. It's a military alliance. It exists for the collective self-defense of its members, as it has since the 1940s. And this doesn't mean that we don't disagree as allies. Doesn't mean that we're not sharply critical of some allies' behavior. But the only person, there would be rejoicing in a few capitals if that expulsion happened, and that would
Russia,
be Yerevan, Athens, and Moscow.
Yeah, that's okay. Gerard, your thoughts on that?
Well, there's always a question whether for a rogue member of an organization like NATO or European Union, whether it is better to punish and kick out that member, which may lead to more extreme and more isolated behavior, or to keep it and then try and control it, try and mitigate, try and soften the behavior. I think it is very important to realize one thing here. Moscow allowed Turkey to come into the South Caucasus in the way it did this time because its overall aim is to detach Turkey from NATO, from the US, from the West.
And that will lead to I'm going to interrupt you there for just a second, because that takes me to my second question I was going to ask the senator, and I want to get Ergun and Zoe to jump in on this. Senator, you mentioned the axis of evil being Iran and China, but you can't ignore the Russian influence in the region. Gerard, when you talked about basically you were saying the ends justify the means, that's how Turkey is operating. Is the end for Turkey and Erdogan closer relations with Russia, and is Russia trying to exercise hegemony in the region via Turkey?
What we had in Artsakh is a very simple political game. We had the oligarchs use the muscle, which is the Azeris and the Turks, to go in there and do their threatening, while they came through the back door saying, sign the deal at the end of the barrel of a gun.
Right.
Now, to the point of the ambassador, you're absolutely right. The NATO alliance is a military alliance, but a military alliance to protect what? If you're not willing to protect freedom, human rights, international rule of law, and you allow one of your key members of that alliance to run roughshod over those principles, then it calls into question the legitimacy of NATO itself. And that's why we live in the world of disruption right now, and nationalism is growing even within the midst of our Western democratic worlds, because people are questioning the legitimacy of these once important institutions that were set up with noble principles. So if you're going to tell me that we're going to tolerate a member of NATO that does the heavy lifting for Putin, that justifies alliances and making economic deals with China, then we have to really revisit these institutions and wonder what we're all about if we're not about certain principles.
I'd like to, to your point, I'd like to get Zoe and Ergun in on this. Zoe, your thoughts?
My thoughts is that if you're going to have a member that is breaking the rules and doing whatever it wants and not get slapped on the wrist, but NATO slapping other members on the wrist, then it's not fair. It's not a fair game. And that's what happens. Greece gets slapped on the wrist for minor things. Yes, Greece will enter Turkish water, let's say, and Turkey will enter Greek waters, but Turkey doesn't get slapped on the wrist when it does that. And if you're gonna hold a member to certain rules, you've got to do it across the board and not play favoritism, which is what's happening. Like even now with Turkey entering Greece's waters, Germany is selling arms to Turkey. And Turkey wants to purchase submarines that will keep them away from Greek eyes, underwater. So it's bothersome. If you're going to do that, you've got to play fair across the board.
Okay.
When you're a member of such an alliance.
Ergun, your thoughts on that?
Here, I believe European Union and especially Germany plays a heavier role than NATO. Germany, since the beginning of the First World War, supports Turkey in every way. Merkel government is not different in these policies.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, if Germany changes its policy towards Turkey, lots of things can change overnight. You see, there is three pieces of world nowadays are shaping: Asian Pacific, European Union, and North American. Turkey has no choice but to be a part of European Union because of its economics. Turkey sells most of its products to Europe and get support financially from Europe also.
So you believe, to interrupt, you believe that the European Union can exact a heavier price or put more pressure on Turkey than NATO?
I do believe, and I believe the elections in Georgia will have more influence on Turkey as in the United States, because when the Congress has the higher hand determining the foreign policy, especially towards Turkey, Biden's hands are tied. Otherwise, American presidents have a tendency to treat Turkey favorably because of its geographics.
Okay. I'm going to follow up this one. Hold on just a second. I'm going to move on because we've got a lot to cover, but I want to make, I want to give the ambassador like the last word here because of what the senator said. But Ambassador Mann, to the senator's point, and I want to look at both of your points here about NATO. To his point, NATO is supposed to be an alliance of people who have like-minded interests. But to your point, we can't really police another country. It's not as if we're the police officers. So is there a middle ground to reach, or is this an intractable point to which we will find ourselves coming back to over and over again without the ability to make a definitive decision?
No, I take the senator's point that the alliance must rest on shared values. But we've been through the issue of troublesome members throughout the decades in NATO, with the Greek colonels in '67, with Franco, with Salazar's Portugal. And fundamentally, it's a military alliance, and that's our proper focus. The one thing I would add to this, Brian, is what this discussion brings out is that there is a profound need for US-Turkish relations to become productive again. They've been deteriorating for 17 years. The Trump administration on this, as in most things, has no foreign policy. So this is a
Preaching to the choir there, brother.
a serious issue for the incoming administration.
So that brings me to one of the questions that from the audience is, will the foreign policy between the United States and Turkey change with the Biden administration, and how do you think it should change if it does? Gerard, I'll start with you because you wanted to chime in and I kind of cut you off. So I'll give you the first whack at this one.
No, it's okay. Let me say something, a question about NATO, the issue of NATO, and ask a question. What is NATO defending itself from? Does it have the same value as it did in 48, 55, or even 10 years ago? If the threat is Russia and Turkey is in bed with Russia, then what are we talking about when we're talking about NATO? So this is one question. Now, in terms of US, Turkey, and Biden administration, I would point out one thing. The US has been withdrawing from the world scene for some time now. Trump exacerbated it, but the US in general has less involvement and commitment to other world issues, partly because the US has lost some of its resources, some of its will, but also because China has gone up as a major power. So I think we have to look at US-Turkey relations and other relations in terms of how much of what has happened to Turkey is a result of the absence of a US leadership in the world.
So let me then toss to Ambassador Mann there. What do you think the Biden administration should do in regards to Turkey?
That
was a heavy sigh there, brother.
Near the top of my personal wish list would be to repair transatlantic relations, revitalize the NATO alliance, and develop a coherent and tough policy towards Russia.
But to the Gerard's point, what's the point of NATO?
The point of NATO, I think, is that we cannot take the security and stability of these nations for granted. We have a resurgent Kremlin under Putin's leadership. Europe and the United States have also been attacked by Islamic jihadism. And I'm confident there's a role for NATO there. These are difficult questions to articulate the answer, but NATO has been a force for good for more than 70 years. And we need to strengthen that in a way that has eroded shamefully in the past several years.
So, Senator, what would you like to see your allies in the United States do differently under Biden in regards to Turkey?
Look, I don't believe that that Donald Trump was the root of the disease. I think he's just a symptom of the disease that we're facing in the Western industrialized world. Like I said, we are living currently in a world of disruption because of economic and other challenges, and ever-growing nationalism because people in the West are starting to lose their faith in a lot of the institutions like NATO, like the United Nations, like the role the United States used to play, the moral role they used to play in the Western world. But in order for the US to play that role, all Western democracies have to look at themselves in the mirror. When we are pursuing our foreign policy strictly over the last decade, particularly on just simply economic issues, we're opening the door to losing track of the values. Like Gerard said earlier, once upon a time, NATO was built on fundamental principles. So
I hear you, but what specifically would you like to see your allies?
I want to see when a country like Armenia that turns its back to the tyrant of Russia and says, we want to be transparent, we want to be accountable in our country, we want to be truly free and democratic. And then the Western world turns their back on them because they're surrounded by two Islamic fundamentalist state and a tyrant, and they don't have oil, they don't have any riches, we don't have any economic interest in Armenia. We turn our back and walk away and say, we're disturbed with what's going on in Artsakh, we're disturbed with what's going on in Karabakh, but nothing more than platitudes and words.
So you'd like to see the Biden administration address that issue specifically?
I do. I'd like to see a principled foreign policy, which we didn't see from Mr. Trump. That's the criticism I've always had as a conservative. There was nothing principled in it. But the truth is we haven't seen a lot of principled foreign policy coming from the United States, our Western allies, or Canada itself. And that's why I say we need to look at ourselves collectively in the mirror and have a democratic summit of democratic nations and start talking about values rather than trying to outdo each other to sell radar equipment, which the Germans are trying to do and the French are trying to do and the Canadians are trying to do at the expense of fundamental values that we share.
I agree with that. My son has radar on his toy drone. That's probably better than some countries. But so yeah, I want to skip to you. What would you like to see the Biden administration do that hasn't been done in regards to Turkey?
I don't want to go on and on, but I echo everything that Senator Housakos said. You're looking at a people, especially Armenians, they have nothing. They have no support. They're landlocked. They're fighting. They're strong fighters. I mean, I am of Spartan descent. I think the Armenians are even stronger, to be able to put up with so much over so many years and ask for help and not get it. It is heartbreaking, especially, and as a Canadian, we talk about, as Senator Housakos said, all these ethics and our ethos about supporting and, we love people, et cetera, but we're not doing anything. We turn a blind eye to it. And that is, it's unacceptable, really.
And what would you like to see the new Biden administration do in regards to Turkey that isn't being done now?
First, determine who is the real policymaker in Turkey, Erdogan or his new partners. There is a Nazi kind MHP party in Turkey, very influential, vis-a-vis Turkishness or this İttihat Terakki kind of policies. So when Biden was elected, Erdogan tried to appease him by introducing some kind of reforms, but MHP just opposed it and it stopped short, nothing happened. So if it's Erdogan still making the shots, American Congress can get into touch with Erdogan and pass a resolution which he has the highest fear and investigating his and his family's wealth around the world. That's the best thing to do. Just let the American law work.
I'm going to take this moment here to remind everyone in the audience, if you have a question, please put it in the chat forum and we'll pick it up from there and feed it to our panelists who so far I love the discussion. I'm going to keep with you. I'm going to go to the next one. What do you think the future status of the Kurds are under Turkey's hegemony these days?
Turkey played Kurds very well against each other, especially in northern Iraq. There is a possibility that between PKK and Barzani forces, maybe also Iraqi army, can go over a war for Shangal and mountain of Kandil. That's a real threat. As long as Turks are not united, Kurds, Turkey will dominate them in Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. But their best hope is for the United States to stay in Syria and protect them from further Turkish aggression, because those people who were forced out of Afrin are living in shambles. Yesterday there was heavy rains and they didn't have a roof overhead. And this is the same situation like Armenia, Karabakh.
Gerard, what do you think?
About the Kurds?
Yep.
I think whether united or not, Turkey is going to continue oppressing them, repressing them. I don't think really anyone cares. And if anyone cares that they will do anything serious about it. We do not have that kind of muscle or willingness to use muscle. Let me refer to the question of democracy and democratic values.
Yes.
I'll share with you something I haven't. Last time I met Prime Minister Pashinyan of Armenia, which was in February, just before COVID. I told him that in case of war, do not expect any help because you're a democratic leader, because Armenia is a democracy. I told him no European country, no America will help you.
Wow.
Because I didn't think they would. I said, democracy is not what drives countries and what drives interests.
You're a clairvoyant man. Unfortunate.
Well, it's unfortunate. I wrote an article on September 1. That's 3 weeks before the war started. And I said, Turkey will be involved in much more severely. And the next war, it will be very, very difficult for the Armenians to win. That was 3 weeks before the war. So it's not a matter of clairvoyance. It's a matter of knowing how to read documents, statements, and moods. So that's what it is. Now, let me also say something about the Turkey. Brian, you asked whether Turkey's game is to do this or that with Russia.
Right.
I think Turkey's game is what the Ottoman Empire did at the end of the 20th century. Play one against the other and represent value for both and expecting that you'll get whatever you can from one side or the other.
And how do we deal with that? That's the question. I mean, I think we've established that, and you succinctly pointed out, but we've kind of been dancing around that for the last 30 minutes, is that they're opportunistic and pitting one against the other, Russia against the United States, in order for them to enhance their own well-being. But how do you deal with that realistically? I'd like, and I don't want your answer to that, but the first thing I want to do is ask the ambassador that question. Ambassador, how do you because Gerard makes a very salient point that it appears that Turkey is playing one against the other, or everyone against each other, in order to enhance their own well-being. How do you deal with that? Keep them as a member of NATO, keep them in the European Union, and avoid a deadly conflict.
Well, I think there's some basic facts about all of this. First of all, Turkey has a long time deep partnership with Azerbaijan. I don't see it so much as playing all the sides against each other in some Machiavellian way, as simply following through on a long-term alliance and having the favorable technology to do it. In terms of, and Gerard is totally right, for the US to get involved in Armenia's side, not going to happen. And that was apparent when Saakashvili had hoped that the US or the West would come to his aid back in 2008 in the conflict with Russia. Simply not going to happen.
So how do you deal with it?
Well, there's a basic point I think we have to bring out now. And that is, this is not a matter of, even if I were to agree with the point that the US should be tremendously tough on Ankara, and I do not, I don't agree we should make them a pariah state. The US can do that till the cows come home, but it will have no effect unless we have a broad coalition to join us in that.
Right.
Unless we get all of Europe behind it, and even then, with the Chinese as a major factor, and the rest of the world not going to join into that, that's not a strategy that's going to bear fruit. The Russia sanctions, the European and American sanctions on Russia illustrate this point. So there needs to be a more workable solution And this is why I think it's a diplomatic task for Biden in the first instance.
So, Zoe, let me ask you, what do you think would work?
For me, I agree in part with the ambassador.
Wait a minute. Hold on. I want to go to Zoe first, and then I'll get
Sorry,
to
Zoe. Sorry, I thought he said senator, but
Yeah.
you're certainly qualified to be a great one. So.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know if diplomatic ties, if a diplomatic means is the right answer. But I'm not of a diplomatic train of thought. You know, it hasn't worked before.
That's why I asked you.
Yeah, it hasn't worked before. So how is it going to work now? I mean, I think what's important and at play are the commercial interests. Not even the European Union is cohesive. You know, the Northern EU members don't care about what the South does. The South wants support. It hasn't worked. It tried to work and it hasn't. And as much as everybody tries to say we're all Europeans, we're not. So how would something like this work from a diplomatic perspective with Turkey? I don't think so. I think they need to be a bit tougher.
So, Senator, I will toss it to you, but I want to add a caveat or an addition to the question. Ambassador Mann mentioned that we can't make Ankara a pariah state. Is it your opinion that we should, or are you in agreement with him on that? And then to follow up on what you started to talk about before I got to Zoe.
President Erdogan has already made Turkey a pariah state, so that's out of our hands. Second of all, I do agree with the ambassador that it's not a question of Erdogan playing off one against the other. Azerbaijan in this particular conflict is nothing more than an outpost for Turkey. And all the Azerbaijanis did is they took advantage of an invitation by the Russians, supported by the Turks, to go in there and do something that's completely deplorable against indigenous and an independent state. So the real issue in terms of addressing the problem in Ankara has to do with the fact that they're just not dividing and conquering. They're taking advantage of the fact that we're a discombobulated Western democratic group of nations and running roughshod in various areas because they know they can. So what we need, in turn, going back to your question, Brian, is we need some leadership, and hopefully it'll come by a world leader, one of the G20 countries, that will stand up and has the strength of will to bring everybody together. And the biggest challenge of all is bringing together Western European democracies, like Zoe appropriately pointed out, that they amongst themselves are constantly in a bickering mode over a few $1 billion of trade here, there, and everywhere, rather than focusing on the fundamental principles of our society, which is democracy and freedom. That's what many people lost their lives for fighting 70 years ago, and we lost sight of that. Somewhere along the way, our democracies have transformed themselves in just greed. And as we know, many empires throughout the history of time have fallen apart, in large part because
every single one of them.
Absolutely. And we're on the verge of that. So the issue with Ankara is Ankara and Beijing and Iran and Russia, they will continue to be belligerent. They will continue to pursue their economic interests and their geopolitical interests in the wild, wild west, because there's no more cohesion amongst those of us that we hope and think still believe in some fundamental values.
Erdogan, I'm going to go to you for the next question. How do you think, let's take a look at the evolving Turkish-Pakistani ties. The growing equations of Turkey with nuclear Pakistan aren't in focus. So where do you think that goes, and how will that influence the overall equation? Erdogan.
First, let me emphasize that since the Ottomans, when Turkey needed to do reforms or getting close to the West, was when Turkey had a big economic crisis, when bankrupted. So Turkey is on the verge of bankrupting again because of corruption and wrong investments. So Turkey is going to need big financial support from Western institutions, not from, he cannot get it from Russia or Iran. So he's going to knock the doors of European Union and United States. So there is a chance there for pushing Erdogan to do reforms, some kind of. With Pakistan, I guess that Turkey won't dare to become a second Pakistan. They are more clever than that. they will try to create a united front against West, but do not push it to the boundaries being alienated from the European Union or the NATO.
Gerard, what are your thoughts?
But I think I'd like to address the question of what could be done.
Yes.
Look, we have a new world order which is characterized by total disorder, right? We agree on that. Now, let me remind you what Zbigniew Brzezinski said in mid-1990s after the Soviet collapse. He was looking at the future and he said, we have maybe a window of 10, 20 years when the US will be a superpower, the only superpower. And we have to imagine US policy. What can we do to use this window? What kind of world do we want to create? And his answer was that we have to resolve the main conflicts in key areas of the world, but also encourage and have established democratic societies, countries, where they're not, so that when we're no longer the only superpower, when there's China and maybe others, India and maybe Brazil, then we will not have the kind of security threats that we can imagine or we have now. And
Right.
what happened? Well, that did not work the way he imagined. Whether the US didn't do it right or the others didn't want to behave as we wanted it. So we lost that. Now, what needs to be done is for the Western democracies, as has been suggested by my colleagues here, they have to come together and to revisualize the world.
Yes, but how?
Well, to decide what kind of world we want, what are the values we should insist on, and accordingly decide whether Turkey is in or out, and you act in a united manner. That is, I personally do not think kicking Turkey out.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
you're talking about a united manner when we haven't been able to show a united front.
Well, then it's useless, right?
Well,
I think.
I hope it's not useless. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm saying that if we don't do something like that, to come together and rethink our own futures and the future, what kind of world we want to see, at least where we have an influence, and from there derive the values by which we decide whether we like Russia or not, whether NATO is good or not now, or should be revamped in some other way. These fundamental questions must be asked if we want to bring them back some order, because piecemeal Band-Aid with Turkey, with Iran will not work.
Well, I agree with you there. Let me ask Ambassador, I'll take a bit further. Everyone's talked, Senator mentioned it, Gerard mentioned it, Zoe mentioned it, Erga mentioned it, you've mentioned it, leadership. American leadership, or a leadership from somewhere in the world, is going to be necessary to put together these pieces so there's some kind of united front in dealing with it. How much, and we've kind of danced around this a little bit, being a symptom and not a cause, but how much has Trump's personal relationship and his family relationship damaged the cause of dealing with Turkey? I'll start with the ambassador. Has it?
Yeah, I think profoundly. And part of it is Trump's well-known predisposition. Trump, as a would-be tough guy, wants to be friends with people who are bona fide tough guys, like Erdogan and Putin. So that has not helped. It clearly has undercut any effective diplomacy to be done. It's in terms of leadership, and let me take a step backwards. The next administration is, first of all, living in Ian Bremmer's G0 world, where it's not a G2, it's one where there is no preponderant power. The second thing is a new administration is going to have to choose its shots. So North Korea is a pariah, Iran is a pariah, we're sanctioning Russia. You know, how much can we as the United States and Canada and the NATO alliance do this? We are going to have to prioritize. And frankly, I think the argument is a far greater one to try and find those difficult but persuasive carrot and stick ways with Turkey, rather than saying you're out of the club.
Senator, how much do you think the that Trump's family relationship has hurt the relations with Turkey?
Look, President Trump's foreign policy approach is one, again, that is at the root of the problem. He took it from a different perspective. His approach was to talk tough and then make backdoor deals. Again, in pursuit of short-term commercial interests, more often than not. He talked tough against the Chinese, imposed embargoes and sanctions, and then boom, a few days later, he would backtrack on them. So that approach doesn't work. We have a prime minister here in Canada who, of course, takes a different approach. He dialogues with everyone, and he takes photo ops with everyone and selfies with everyone. But at the end of the day, he never stands up on any standards. He never says these are the standards that Canada expects in order for us to coexist together, or to do commercial trade together, or be in a military alliance together.
So you're a close ally of Trudeau's, you're telling me.
I'm a close ally to anyone that supports freedom, democracy, rule of law. And currently, we have governments in place that don't do that. I look at our current prime minister. He called China a government and a regime that he admires because they can turn on a dime. We had a resolution in the House of Commons and the Senate of Canada a couple of years ago calling on our government to list the IRGC on the list of terrorist organizations. It passed unanimously in the House and in the Senate. Liberal members of Parliament voted unanimously in favor. 2 years later, the Trudeau government refuses to do it. We've had now egregious behavior on the part of Turkey and Syria. We've seen the encroachment in the Aegean. We've seen this terrible acts behind the scenes, well, not even very behind the scenes, very overtly in Nagorno-Karabakh. And again, all we've gotten from our government is we're monitoring this with concern. So at some point you say to yourself, and going back to the point I made earlier, the public, the people in our democracies are starting to say, wait a second, you guys talk a good game, but none of you guys walk the talk. So I think we need to have our G7, our G20 institutions, and somebody take leadership and say, these are the standards we expect. I'm very hopeful that newly elected President Biden will do that. And hopefully he won't be in the list, added to the list of presidents now over the last 2 decades that have disappointed me in that regard.
Zoe, what are your thoughts?
Again, I echo what Senator Housakos says.
Must be our Spartan connection. I think we think alike.
Are you Spartan? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think transparency is paramount, and no country is transparent, or no region. The EU is not transparent. NATO is not transparent. The United States is not transparent. Sure wasn't in the last 4 years.
I'd maintain it was transparent, but just not in the way they thought they were. But
right, exactly. Transparency for me is key. And if you can get transparency, and just like Professor Gerard said, outline clearly, start from scratch. What do we want? What's important to us? What do the people want? What do the countries need? Then we can get somewhere, I think. But this backdoor business stuff, saying something just for there's a Greek expression, yatamate to cosmo. You're just saying something for the sake of saying it so that people can think that you're on their side. And doing other things behind the scenes is not helpful at all. So,
Erdogan, what are your thoughts? You think that Trump has family relationship has hurt relations with Turkey or helped?
Of course, Erdogan destroyed the state institutions in Turkey. There is no foreign ministry, there is no other ministries. It's just Erdogan, and he used to reach Trump just by a phone call, even he was playing golf. So it was a big advantage to him.
Well, he spent a year of his presidency playing golf. So chances are really good you could reach him there.
But Biden takes a lot of problems from Trump vis-a-vis Turkey, but also 3 advantages points. One is as 400, Turkey should do something about it. He cannot ignore it. And there is this CAATSA sanctions to be put in by Biden, passed by the Congress. There are 2 cases against 2 Turkish banks in New York. One is Halkbank for Iran, the other one is Kuwait Turkish Bank for Hamas, financing Hamas. These are important, and it has ramification for Erdogan and his family members, especially Halkbank. And third one is Kurds. He has to give in to have a fresh start with Biden. He cannot have it all like he did with Trump.
Okay, we're running out of time here, and I want to leave the final word with our academic, with our professor, Gerard. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Where do you see what would be, in your mind, the perfect situation or a preferable situation 4 years from now at the end of the Biden administration in the relationship with Turkey? Where would you like to see Turkey in the world stage? What can realistically be done in the next 4 years to improve the relationship and to improve Turkey?
Well, I think the first question is whether Erdogan will be supported by the Turkish people and the other Turkish political parties. So far, in terms of the foreign adventures, they seem to support him. And as long as they support him, then it's very difficult to get him to change his ways. In terms of US and Turkish relations, I think it was impossible to do much with Trump because there was his personality also, not just his worship of dictators, but also his personality of not doing anything serious in foreign policy. So the Biden administration must sit down for itself and say, what are our values? And then sit down with Turkey and say, these are the things we expect if we want to continue the cooperation we've had, and we expect you to do the following things. And these have to be very specific and justified, that Turkey's interest must be taken into consideration. But I think this has to be done also with NATO and supported by the European Union. That is, if it's just the US, then again, there's a lot of arena where you can play your game. So
Right.
I think there has to be a joint effort to, and also to back up with saying, these are the things that we will stop with you if you're not taking us seriously. That has to be there.
Consequences.
Consequences, of course.
Okay, so I guess I lied a little bit. I'm going to leave the last word then with the ambassador. So do you see it improving in the next 4 years? Do you think that the situation in Turkey in relation to the rest of the world, the international relations, will improve over the next 4 years?
I think so and hope so. First of all, let me say, I could not improve on the professor's final comment. So that I associate myself with that. You know, we're so focused, sadly, on regional conflicts from Crimea through to Karabakh in Eurasia. We collectively have a massive economic rebuilding job to do after COVID. The global system of trade is turbulent and troubled. And as has been mentioned here, I mean, we need a strategic understanding for NATO. There's lots of tasks out here. I am hopeful. Biden is bringing the A team to foreign policy, and that fact alone leaves me with an upbeat outlook.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned COVID because that has been an underlying factor in everything, though we don't tend to recognize it as such often. It has been. And I want to thank all of you all for being here today. It was very fascinating discussion. I enjoyed it immensely. I thought all the points were very well taken. I appreciate you for taking the time out during your busy day to talk with us. I am Brian Karem. I'm your host of this wonderful event, and we're very happy that Global Strat Solutions has enabled us to put this together for you. We look forward to doing it again, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Thank you very much, and please have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Stephen.
Bye.
Bye, Gerard.
Very happy to meet you all.
Likewise.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
discussion.
Oh.
Very informative, actually. So
Yeah,
very
it
much
was
appreciated.
very well done. I thought you all were very good.
That's a very
So,
good discussion.
You know, you're only as good on these panels as the host. So you're able
Yes.
to navigate it beautifully, Brian. You
Yeah.
really
Thank you.
Yeah.
You did a great job, Brian. Yes.
Thank you.
take care.
All right.
I
Take
appreciate
care.
it, guys. Take care.
Keep in touch.
We will.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.